That's right. DEI statements and all the rest of it needs to go. I'm sick and tired of DEI. I'm sick and tired of equity. It has nothing to do with civil rights. It's actually quite the opposite. DEI says that you should evaluate people by their political identity and not who they are or judging them by the content of their character. We should judge people by the content of their character. We should not be judging people based on some newfangled political identity, right? What are the top three? In case you've forgotten: race, class, and sexuality. We don't need to evaluate people on those things. That's a waste of time, except for the DEI people. They seem to be pushing that. And that's what they care the most about: identity politics. They don't care about lying. They don't care about plagiarism. They don't care about doing their job properly. All they really care about is making sure that you follow the correct political views. That's it, right? Herbert Marcusean nonsense that they believe you should only follow far leftist opinions, right? Repressive tolerance or oppressive tolerance. I think he believes repressive tolerance. You're only supposed to tolerate extreme leftist opinions. Obviously, right wing opinions are not allowed, but even moderately left opinions are not allowed, according to people who follow those ridiculous ideologies. So as it says here, DEI statements are an ideological pledges of allegiance. Time to abandon them. Yes. On posting for a position as an assistant professor in international and comparative education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, let's remember the ratio at Harvard and Yale is nearly 1-to-1 administrator to student. You got a lot of administrators who have nothing to do, okay, except push politics in the name of DEI statements. All right. Applicants are required to submit a CV, cover letter, research statement, 3 letters of reference, and a description of their orientation towards diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. At Harvard and elsewhere, hiring for academic jobs increasingly requires these so-called diversity statements, which Harvard's Derek Bach Center for Teaching and Learning describes as being about your commitments to further EDIB within the context of institutions of higher education by requiring academics to profess and flaunt faith in DEI. The proliferation of diversity statements poses a profound challenge to academic freedom. Yeah, you're only allowed to push one political view. You can't even have discussions anymore. They take Marxist ideology and they don't even emphasize the dialectic, right? What's the dialectic? That's supposed to be where both sides throw out their point without interruption, and then you reach some higher truth. I mean, it's kind of religious in nature, Marxism and its derivative ideologies. But hey, if people could talk, it'd still be better than these jerks constantly interrupting you and constantly telling you have to follow this particular opinion or that. It says here, for the purpose of showcasing attentiveness to DEI, the center suggests answering questions such as, how does your research engage with and advance the well-being of socially marginalized communities? Why can't you just teach business, regardless of the political identity of your students? Isn't that how it's supposed to be done? Do you know how the following operate in the academy? Implicit bias, different forms of privilege, settler colonialism, systematic and interpersonal racism, or systemic, sorry, homophobia, heteropatriarchy, and ableism. What's the narrative they push surrounding colonialism? We can't even support traditionally liberal institutions because they say, like, well, that was created by white people, therefore it must be bad, which is a really poor argument. It doesn't hold water. How do you account for the power dynamics in the classroom? That's Paulo Freirean nonsense. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but Paulo Freire is a joke. He's another Marxist. He was a huge fan of Marxist Leninism. He wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, another terrible book. I mean, I skimmed through it and I didn't find any of it to be useful. And he thinks that classrooms are just a power dynamic, that the students have as much knowledge as the teacher. on the subject matter, which I don't think is typically true. If that is true, then that person probably should not be a teacher because they're not an expert in the subject matter. But they wanted to bring communism and collectivism to the classroom. He also wanted to reinvent Christianity to stop pushing individual rights and instead collectivizing it to say you're just a product of your religious identity. But anyways, how do you design course assessments with EDIB in mind, and how have you engaged in or led these campus initiatives or programming, right? So they just want to make sure you're following the right political nonsense, that you're affirming the DEI bureaucracy. They're all about affirmation, right? Can't question anyone's opinion, supposedly, but you can, right? You're supposed to accept everything. That's typical, but then really you're not. You're only supposed to accept their politics. Good thing asking no questions that challenge it, all the while making sure to use in one's attestations the easy to parody DEI lingo. It does not take much discernment to see, moreover, that the diversity statement regime leans heavily and tendentiously towards varieties of academic leftism and implicitly discourages candidates who harbor ideological conservative dispositions. Right. The right wing has been leaving college campuses dramatically for the past 20 years, but even slowly in the 80s and 90s as well. Detractors reasonably suspect that underneath the uncontroversial aspirations for diversity statements facilitating a more and opening environment for everyone are controversial goals, including the weeding out of candidates who manifest opposition to or show insufficient enthusiasm for the DEI regime. Yeah, it's Maoist, right? That's BLM and Antifa as well. The Maoist revolution is what they're looking for. They want to turn over the current environment and current power structures so that they can put their cronies in charge. And that's what they've been doing in the colleges. And let's remember, most socialist revolutions come out of the education system. If you allow them to capture the next generation of children, you'll have major problems. Fortunately, though, parents have done their due diligence to a large extent, and a lot of Gen Z is actually quite right wing. The boomers were naive in some cases and allowed the education system to push their nonsense kind of secretly on millennials, my generation, which is why I think that we have the largest percentage of socialists, and that's quite unfortunate. So you can't support capitalism, you can't be a patriot, you certainly can't support making America great again. Oh my goodness, don't tell anyone on a college campus you're a Trump supporter. Well, I mean, unless you're looking for argument, then go for it. But so this article is pretty good from the Crimson. Recommend checking that out. Here, this article says Harvard professor of honesty tampered with data and should be fired. University probe. Yeah, Harvard's a joke, right? They're just a den of plagiarism and unethical administrators pushing political indoctrination. So, Francesca Gino, a star behavioral scientist at Harvard Business School, whose work has focused on dishonesty, was found to have tweaked observations in 4 studies so that their findings boosted their hypotheses. Wow. Hello, irony. According to nearly 1,300-page report detailing the school months-long investigation. Huh. Interesting. The committee concludes that Professor Gino has engaged in multiple instances of research misconduct across all 4 studies at issue in these allegations. Harvard, why would you spend tens of thousands of dollars to send your kids there? Don't do it. Gino, a star academic who had authored over 140 academic papers. I wonder how many were actually cited. I bet very few. That tends to be the case in the humanities and social sciences. They rarely get cited because no one cares. Came under fire year after a trio of behavioral scientists published a series of explosive posts on their blog, Data Colada, writing 4 academic papers published between 2012 and 2020 that the Harvard professor had co-authored contained fraudulent data. Big surprise. Not really surprising. The university report detailed that Harvard began a preliminary investigation of Gino's work in October 2021 after the data Calada researchers brought their concerns about the paper's sketchy data to the school. Yeah, so what a joke. Harvard's a joke. This article, this is kind of interesting, the Substack, the impact of DEI on college campuses. It's a failure. So this guy calls it out. FBT President Eric Smith testified before Congress about DEI in higher education in an address to the Subcommittee on Higher Education and Workforce Development. And he discusses it. Chairman Owens, a ranking and distinguished member of the Higher Education Workforce Development Subcommittee. My name is Eric Smith, and I'm a research fellow. It says here, this is the important part. DEI is built upon a foundation whose mission is to perpetuate racism. Contemporary DEI is not an extension of the civil rights movement. It is undergirded by a quasi-Marxist ideology called critical social justice. The primary tenet of critical social justice is this. The question is not, did racism take place, but rather, how did racism manifest in that situation? So, according to critical social justice, racism is always taking place. There is no need to think for oneself. The narrative of one of perpetual oppression does the thinking for you, right? So there's no question. And if you've heard of the famous author Ta-Nehisi Coates, he actually writes that even if a minority bullies another minority, it's still white supremacy. No white people could be within 5 miles. You could be out in the middle of a field, in the middle of Kansas, no other humans around. A minority bullies another minority. It's still an example of white supremacy. I don't know what they think about foreign countries. They never discuss anything outside of the United States. They typically push Noam Chomsky style narratives. They just haven't correlated that as much with social justice, that the U.S. government oppresses everyone or something ridiculous. Another underlying concept of critical social justice is prescriptive racism, the prescribing of certain values, attitudes, and behaviors onto someone based on race. So they actually recommend this. This is total opposition. Critical social justice is in total opposition to Martin Luther King Jr.'s worldview that we should evaluate people by the content of their character. To shirk these values, attitudes, and behaviors is to be inauthentic, to not be a true member of a particular racial group. So they think there's major distinguishing features between races. Thomas Sowell does not agree. Thomas Sowell says if you took 100 people of one race and 100 people of another race, there would be more diversity within those groups than across it. If across it, you're only evaluating them by one category. Because, over here in one racial group, you got people that are interested in a particular sport, a particular nerdy hobby. Over here in the other racial group, you have somebody with those same interests. In America, in my opinion, people still associate largely based on interest. That's how they make friends, and based on around activities that they partake in and things of that nature. So anyways, it says here, questioning of this ideology is considered proof of your racism, right? Especially for white people, you can't atone for the sins of your existence in critical theory. You're just automatically guilty. You can't actually atone for the sins of your existence. It's a disgusting ideology. I have many stories to tell, but I will share one that illustrates these concepts and the general absurdity of critical social justice. A prominent figure in my field, which is rhetoric and composition, wrote a mass email requesting that people boycott an academic organization because he and others experienced racism during a committee meeting. However, neither he nor anyone would actually explain what happened. I wasn't going to boycott an influential academic organization based on incomplete information, so I asked a simple question: what happened? For this, I was vilified by colleagues of all colors and accused of perpetuating white supremacy. That happens all the time. Remember, LA Times accused Larry Elder of that. My goodness. Merely asking the question, what happened, was considered a form of racism. You see here that an accusation of racism cannot be questioned. Remember, the question is not, did racism take place, but rather, how did racism manifest in that situation? Okay, so this is freeblackthought.substack.com. I recommend checking them out. This article says House Republicans to introduce bill ending a federal funding for medical schools. Good. with DEI race-based mandates. We do not want medical treatment based around DEI. We want the best person for the job. We want the meritocracy. No question there. So hopefully this will go through. We have seen some states are banning DEI. Unfortunately, they will try to rebrand it as something else. DEI is already a rebranding of Marxism. So it's concerning to see what's going to happen next. I think Marxism needs to be declared its own religion. And then we'll be able to identify it and say, hey, our institutions are supposed to be secular. The Educate Act compels medical schools and accrediting agencies to uphold colorblind admissions processes and prohibits the coercion of students who hold certain political opinions. Okay, good. Diversity strengthens medicine, but not if it's achieved through exclusionary practices, right? Diversity of thought is better than anything else. Medicine is about serving others and doing the best job possible in every circumstance. We cannot afford to sacrifice the excellence and quality of medical education at the hands of prejudice and divisive ideology. Let's remember that America has had the best schools historically, that we've had the best medical schools specifically, and that has been going downhill for a while now. So UCLA is also pushing medical students to be climate activists, right? Don't deal with people's health. Become a future Greta Thunberg. It's hard to believe that this is happening, but it is an attempt at a Marxist revolution. Let's remember what happened in Maoist China. They took the doctors, they made them clean the toilets and do worse tasks. Then eventually they started killing them. That's what happens, unfortunately. New discourses. University of California drifts towards conformism. The challenges of representation and the climate for academic freedom in the country's greatest public research university. So this is an article from New Discourses, and says here, the use of mandatory DEI statements as initial screening mechanisms in faculty hiring is the most dramatic of the new administrative policies. This policy can be considered the culmination of a series of efforts that the 10 UC campuses have taken. 10 UC campuses have taken for more than a decade in response to legislative and UC office. The president pressures to place representation at an equal or higher priority than academic qualifications. So a lot of new doctors are going to be terrible. An applicant who sees DEI as antithetical to academic freedom or the university's research mission. By contrast, an applicant who discusses DEI as core values that every faculty member should actively contribute to advancing should receive an excellent score. It is the naive candidate who simply discusses his or her efforts to encourage and recruit students or faculty members of color. All right, so I'd recommend reading this article as well if you have the time. It's pretty good. But we need to get rid of DEI in the education system. I'm not looking forward to going to the doctor the next time I have to go, especially if it's not for, especially if it is for surgery or something. That is not going to be fun.